M. Poilievre, cette semaine, dans un point de presse, a exclu, via son personnel, des questions, tous les médias traditionnels pour en accepter 4 qui sont identifiés à la droite ou à l'extrême droite, dont Rebel News, qui fait campagne pour le 51e État, et Radio-Canada, parce qu'on n'avait pas de représentant d'un média comme ça qui parlait français.
Madame Hébert, est-ce que je peux vous demander quelque chose? Vous avez mentionné qu'on était supporters du 51e État, ce qui est faux.
Who still blindly trust the mainstream media? Probably not you. After all, you're watching us and you already know that mainstream media can no longer be trusted. They may call themselves trustworthy news sources, but that too is a lie. While Pierre Poilievre recognized that mainstream media simply parrots the liberal narrative and has pledged to defund the CBC.
Are you saying that you would step aside and not compete for the head of the country to allow us to get through this crisis? Or I'm unclear about your answer to the last question.
Well, I find it a strange question. Your CBC is asking me to step aside in the next election. It's a very strange request.
There's a suggestion. We could save $1 billion by defunding the CBC.
The Liberals are clinging to their propaganda machine. Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge has even proposed enshrining CBC Radio-Canada's role as an official information source in law, while nearly doubling its funding on a per capita basis.
Enshrine in law the role that CBC Radio-Canada plays in the fight against disinformation to support the public, especially in the current context. And this refers directly to some of the recommendations that were made by the Foreign Interference Commission, which repeated how important it is that Canadians can rely on Canadian sources of information to be more resilient and to understand the patterns that other countries use to disseminate propaganda or disinformation to influence how we live together and our political context. And this is why I propose to anchor in CBC Radio-Canada's mandate its role in helping the Canadian population fight against disinformation and understand fact-based information.
Last year, CBC Radio-Canada received approximately $1.4 billion in taxpayer funding, according to its own annual report. Under the Liberals' proposal, that number could jump to $2.5 billion per year, money taken directly from your pocket, whether you watch it or not. One of CBC Radio-Canada's contributors, political commentator Chantal Hébert, is regularly invited to speak on politics. She is also a speaker that talks about politics and democracy in the so-called fake news, as she stated in her website. But here is the irony. Hébert herself has been caught spreading misinformation, and when confronted about it, she simply ignored the issue. Let me explain. When a journalist or commentator gets something wrong, the responsible thing to do is correct the record and acknowledge the mistake. One recent example is when Hébert claimed, by maintaining our tariff, it's not us who pay, it's them.
Mais pendant ce temps-là, en maintenant nos tarifs, c'est pas nous qui payons, c'est eux.
This is categorically false. Tariffs are taxes imposed on citizens of the country that applies them. A basic economic fact. However, let's assume she simply misspoke. But then, on February 21st, during an episode of CBC Radio-Canada Audio Media Info, Hébert falsely claimed that Rebel News is campaigning for Canada to become the 51st state of America.
Vous parliez de cette entrevue qui a effectivement été publiée dans le Toronto Star. C'est une autre grosse différence entre Stephen Harper et Pierre Poilievre. Monsieur Harper parle au Toronto Star. M. Poilievre, cette semaine, dans un point de presse, a exclu, via son personnel, des questions, tous les médias traditionnels pour en accepter 4 qui sont identifiés à la droite ou à l'extrême droite, dont Rebel News, qui fait campagne pour le 51e État, et Radio-Canada, parce qu'on n'avait pas de représentant d'un média comme ça qui parlait français.
This was not a slip of a tongue. This was deliberate, a blatant attempt to discredit and demonize us. And it is completely false. The event she referenced was a press conference held by Pierre Poilievre on February 20. Out of 10 media outlets present, only 5 were allowed to ask questions.
On the floor, starting with True North.
Why are you accepting questions from all media?
Hello, Mr. Poilievre. Noah Jarvis, True North.
My Media.
Questions from all media here today.
Hey, this is Shubi from My Media.
Thank you. Next question. Question.
Who's asking questions today? Why did you do that? I know everyone asked a question.
Go ahead, sir. You have your.
Oui,
you're up
bonjour,
next.
Jérémy Bergeron, journaliste à Radio-Canada.
Thank you. This will be the final question from Oxygen TV.
Those included Y Media, Oxygen TV, True North, Ribbon News, and Radio-Canada. Hébert described every outlet other than Radio-Canada as being right to far right. But let's break that down because it's completely untrue. True North, center-right, mainly editorial. Y Media, an online platform led by Yudhvir Jaswal, a journalist honored with King Charles Coronation Medal. He has interviewed Trudeau, Harper, Doug Ford, and multiple other Liberal MP. Hardly the profile of a far-right outlet. In fact, Jaswal was featured on CBC before, according to his website. Oxygen TV, a media outlet focused on family and social political issues, their editorial stance leans slightly to the right due to family values, but calling them far right is ridiculous. Ribbon News, categorized by some as editorially conservative, but certainly not far right. What's more, Y Media and Oxygen TV serve diverse immigrant communities. These are voices representing diaspora groups. Hardly a monolithic far-right presence. Meanwhile, mainstream outlets like Global, CBC, CTV, and Canadian Press were present at the event, but were not among those called upon for questions, and Prime Asia as well. So let's be clear. Hébert's claims that the press conference was dominated by right to far right media is completely false. And her assertion that Ribbon News is campaigning for Canada to become the 51st state of America, also completely false. I attempted to ask Hébert why she made these false claims about us. Watch how she reacted. No apology, no correction, just a weird reaction.
Madame Hébert, est-ce que je peux vous demander quelque chose? Vous avez mentionné qu'on était supporteur du 51e État, ce qui est faux. I just see Madame Chantal Hébert. I don't know if you know her, but she's a political columnist in CBC in Radio-Canada. Recently, she spoke about us. She spoke about Ribbon News, saying that we are advocating for the 51st state, what is actually totally wrong. This is defamation. And so it's why I ask her the question why she actually say that about us. And she seems not being interested.
Let me give you another example of intellectual dishonesty, this time from Radio-Canada. In the report reviewing the pandemic, which was published last week on Enquête, the equivalent of the Fifth Estate, they spoke about conspiracy movements, lumping them together with support of becoming the 51st state. On screen, they showed Ribbon News exposed what looked like to create a cognitive link between our media outlet and what they called the obscure network.
Ces mouvements-là, ils n'ont jamais vraiment arrêté. C'est pas comme si du jour au lendemain, à cause que les mesures sanitaires ont été levées, les gens ont arrêté d'adhérer à ces idées-là, que le gouvernement essaie de les contrôler, qu'il faut s'opposer à toute autorité, aux médias et tout ça. Ce sont des gens qui continuent d'opérer peut-être d'abord sur des réseaux plus obscurs, qui étaient moins suivis peut-être par les grands médias ou par le grand public, mais ce qu'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est carrément X, Twitter. On n'a plus besoin d'aller dans les recoins du web pour voir où se tiennent ces discours.
This is the reality of mainstream media in Canada. Taxpayer-funded, unaccountable, and willing to spread misinformation to push their narrative. And they wonder why more and more Canadians are turning them out. You can go over to our special website that is cbclies.com. So it's a petition to request CBC to stop lying, to stop spreading disinformation and misinformation as they are doing often. So you can sign the petition and make your voice heard that if we are going to pay the CBC with our own tax, we want them to stop lying. So go over cbclies.com.